Right now, the world mainly has three telecommunications equipment providers, and all of these companies have an interest in producing one global 5G equipment standard that's interoperable worldwide. And there are political ins and outs with all of these companies, and therefore the implications for tech, really in general, are quite significant. Now, this is such a big subject to tackle, so we brought in Scott Fulton here with us to break it all down. And Scott, what we want to talk about first is specifically those three companies, a little bit about each one. And right off the top, I will say the map behind you is beautiful that I know you created for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and it's always good to be here. Folks who have read me in ZDNet in the past, my dozens upon dozens of readers, probably know by now that I love maps. I like to create maps that sort of tell a story that's different from what people were expecting, that may borrow some imagery from history or from some other place in time to help correlate the scale of things. And the name of my blog on ZDNet is called Scale. With this, what I've done is created an old-fashioned game board, a board game of global dominance in telecommunications. And on this board, I've kind of generalized the geographic markets somewhat, regionalizing them so the world's not full of a grand ton of countries. But each of these is a genuine geographic market in telecommunications. And the three companies that you spoke about that comprise jointly the collective capitals of the telecommunications world are China, naturally, which is the center of Huawei, which has been the center of so much dispute in recent days, and of course Scandinavia. Scandinavia is the home of the other two of the big three, Sweden's Ericsson and Finland's Nokia. Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei buys at least 80% and by some estimates 90% of the telecommunications equipment provider market for the antennas, the transmitters, the receivers, the multi-interface transmitters, MIMO, that you read so much about. These are the three most important companies in the field of 5G right now. And they're situated in two places in the world. Unfortunately, one of them is the subject of a global trade war, which has been sparked between the United States and China. The United States is threatening other countries with sanctions, tariffs, isolation from the rest of the world if they do business with a Chinese operation, in fact. And Huawei is interesting because, with most of the rest of the world, you have corporations that are not necessarily linked with their respective countries. With China, you do have a link because the country, the government of China, is one of the major shareholders, if not the major shareholder. It's secretive, but we can pretty much guess, in Huawei. So when a country makes good on its promise to the United States to not do business with Huawei, a Chinese operation, China, the country, can retaliate, which is what we have seen in Australia. This is unbelievably, for most folks, the touch point of a global telecommunications trade war. Australia made a decision, which it seemed like was a no-brainer at the time, to support the United States position on not doing business with Huawei, and cited security concerns, most importantly among them. The United States claimed that China is forcing Huawei to build backdoors into its networking equipment that the country, China, and its spies may later exploit. Australia says, we agree, we're abiding by this, and we're going to scale back. China has retaliated in a very serious way by closing its ports to the import of Australian coal. Australia is a major coal provider for the world, and China is its major customer by far. Closing its ports absolutely hurts the Australian economy. This causes disruption with the Australian government and Australian Parliament. And there are members of Parliament right now, a lot of them are in the opposition, but some of them aren't. And they're asking the question, what's more important, our alliance with the United States or having China as a customer? And some of them are absolutely arguing the latter. It's this type of trade spat which is causing the breakdown of global 5G into factions, some of them the size of continents, some of them only the size of very small countries with very major influence. And it's this problem which can, in effect, impact all of technology, especially the internet, down the road.
Yeah, and Scott, when you talk about the implications just for tech in general, and obviously the smartphone industry completely dependent on 5G, and we've been talking about 5G and the hype for so long now. So, what happens here because of all the politics, the delays, and things like that? Then what is next, or what's at stake?
What's at stake, quite literally, is the global internet. The fact that the internet is global. I'll explain to you. Google, an American company, faced with the prospect of sanctions from the United States government or fines, which is a distinct possibility, decided to go ahead with the American order to reduce its influence and stop doing business directly with Huawei. The idea being that Google licenses Android for smartphones. Naturally, Android is Google's operating system. Without the Android brand on Huawei's smartphones, especially its 5G phones, they may be perceived as having lesser value in the global market. So this is a very serious thing. But apparently there was a plan in case this sort of thing happened. Just almost a couple of weeks ago at the time of this taping, China, the country, not the company, the country, announced the creation of what it calls an unreliable entities list, a list of countries and or companies that it feels it's suspicious to be doing business with in retaliation. The list exists. We do not know what the members are, but we can probably take a guess by the timing of things that Google is on that list. And within 48 hours of the announcement of that list's creation, there was a meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin of Russia, with Putin pledging publicly the support of Huawei in the establishment of a competitive Linux OS for smartphones based on its Aurora standard. And what that would probably mean is that, okay, you might not have Android on the brands of the smartphones, but it might not matter because you have probably the capability to run most, maybe not all, but certainly most Android apps on that phone anyway. And you're thinking, well, that still kind of creates a second-tier player. Who's going to want a second-tier smartphone? And the answer to that is a lot of folks, if the market is large enough. How large would the market be? You'd have all of Africa, because Africa's main telecommunications center is in Johannesburg, and its largest telecom player in 5G has swept the continent with 5G deployments all the way up into Europe, into Cyprus. They've made a deal with Cyprus, so you've got that. You've got major countries in Europe following suit. Germany is on board with Huawei. France is saying we're going to determine these things on a case-by-case basis with French telecommunications suppliers, but you can pretty much bet that that's leaving the door open for Huawei in France. Spain is on board with Huawei. So you've got a European bloc emerging. India is very likely going to be all in with Huawei. You already have Southeast Asia. So you've got an emerging market here, and where Europe goes, South America will follow, because Spain is the major supplier of telecommunications equipment throughout that continent. Latin America could follow in suit, and you could very well peel Canada off yet. It may follow the European course of action rather than the American, which would mean you're kind of creating a wall of sorts, a new Berlin Wall, if you will, around the United States, Australia, and this tiny little country over here called the United Kingdom, which is now stuck between a rock and a hard place. It wants to be able to stay part of the European Common Market as Brexit takes effect in October, and it's negotiating for the ability to do that. The European Common Market sets standards on how roaming takes place on your smartphones when you go from country to country, which means you have to have a universal infrastructure throughout that continent. And if Britain sides with us and goes with an all Scandinavian smartphone infrastructure, it may not be able to be supported in the European Common Market. So you start to see where Vladimir Putin must be loving this. If you're listening, Russia, hi, we can pretty much guess that you're applauding this situation right now. It's created global chaos through some very smart, strategic intelligence infrastructure plays.
Yeah, it very much so, and Scott, and it's really such a complex issue to try to wrap your head around, and you sprinkle in a lot of politics, and it's a difficult subject for people to really understand. So, your final thoughts here. What is it that you want to get out to the audience? A couple of things that you think are important that they note, and things to continue to follow.
Well, as folks can tell from this video, my head is huge. So wrapping my head around something, it takes superhuman effort. But besides that, what I would want to see from this, there needs to be, at the end of all of this, one, and just one, global 5G standard. And all of the telecommunications providers, all three of them, but also the minor players in the minority, have an interest in a global single market, in being able to upgrade a transmitter in India the same way it upgrades a transmitter in Australia and in Canada. When you have global parts, a global parts infrastructure, you keep costs down. Also, a single global market is regulated by the World Trade Organization, which is an independent body. And the intellectual property that's necessary to make that sort of global standard possible is held by and marshaled by the WTO. And that keeps prices low as well. So there is an interest there in working together. And certainly the telecommunications companies, even Huawei's people, really know this. They know that in the end, it's going to be better to have a single standard. That's why their engineers continue to participate in the global standards bodies like 3GPP. They do not want to be left behind. But their major stakeholder could be pulling them in one direction or the other. So there's a lot of trepidation, and there are countries that are openly wondering whether the United States stance on 5G and on Huawei and on China might not turn 180 degrees the opposite direction round about the third week of January 2021. And so 17 months for them may not be too long a period of time to wait to see how all that pans out. On the other hand, 17 months is a couple of product cycles for the lifetime of telecommunications providers. And some of them, especially those that are stuck with the untenable 4G that's already too expensive for them in some countries, may not be able to wait that long. So what I would advise them to do is hang on, hold tight. This may not be a permanent state of affairs. We may not be playing 5G in 17 months or so, and we may not be playing 5G even sooner than that. If some folks with, 2 or 3 folks with respectable standing in world affairs make their way to the White House and make a very potent case.
Yeah, and that most certainly could be the case. Well, the stakes are really high, Scott, and a lot of moving parts to this. So we will certainly be checking back in with you as we move down the road here just to see how things progress with this.
I look forward to that, said the Klingon chancellor.
And I think your head's perfect, by the way. It fits you well.
Thank you. That make you and my wife both the minority of two, but I'll take what I can get.
All right, there you go. Well, for more on the future of 5G and the politics involved, make sure you check out ZDNet.